For Lee, Kansas.
Yeah. Hi, Dinesh. You touched on it earlier, but I'd like to expand on the situation of abortion. I feel that, one of the prime drivers of the liberal movement today is an attempt to cover up the facts of abortion and its relationship to historical lows in this country and elsewhere. One of the prime drivers behind slavery was the notion that Negroes were not people, and so they could be enslaved. And then again, later in the 20th century, the Nazi contention that Jews were not people, and the consequences of that. And now that the fetus or the baby prior to birth is not a person, and the notion that it's okay to kill them. I mean, it's commonly assumed that it's murder, but it's murder because we can draw a line. And so that if somehow we make abortion illegal and the crime that it is, that they will be forced to accept they are no better than slave owners or Nazis. And so their primary thrust in defeating conservatism is to hang on to that notion that somehow it is a moral thing to support abortion.
See, I would not make a direct equation between abortion equals Nazism equals slavery. I do want to say this. One of my favorite books is written by the political philosopher Harry Jaffa. It's called The Crisis of the House Divided. It's a study of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. They were basically debating the issue of slavery. Douglas, if you think about it, took a very interesting position, which corresponds almost identically with the pro-choice position. Douglas didn't say he was for slavery. He said, I'm not for it, and I'm not against it. I am for each state deciding for itself. Let each state vote up or down on slavery, and that should be the law of the land. In a sense, what Douglas was doing is arguing the same line that we hear today in the so-called abortion debate. Lincoln's argument is very interesting. Lincoln basically said, look, you, Douglas, are celebrating the principle of choice, but you cannot defend choice without regard to what is being chosen. Yes, if you are talking about people having the choice of between this and that, or going here or there for vacation, sure. But on the other hand, if you are having them choose whether or not a Negro is a human being, on that you don't get to choose. In other words, choice has got to consider what is being chosen. So I think that in a way there's a shallowness to the abortion debate, as though merely saying pro-choice settles the issue. Pro-choice about what? I think that debate has been, unfortunately, not had in this democratic country because the Supreme Court has come marching in, has arrogated a moral decision that should be made democratically in the community, and has made it by fiat. I think this is, in a sense, a kind of illiberalism, inconsistent with what the founders wanted in a self-governing community.
Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hi.
Hello.
You're on the air.
I'm from Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I feel that your writing about racism in this country is entirely inappropriate. You're not from here. You came here at 17. You are not Frederick Douglass, nor are you Booker T. Washington. You are from India, right about the caste system. And I'm quite sure, by the way, I am a grandmother, a woman of color, and a psychologist by profession. And I listened to you. I've been listening to you from the first time you came on, and it's something very gnawing about your personality. And I felt that with many people. And I want to weigh in saying that I believe that your wife, I'm sure she's a white person. She's not Indian. She's not black, because you're the type who would marry a white woman, because you need that, because you had a problem with the caste system in your own country. So you need to think about writing about racism, black folks in this country, because you're really not there. It's not appropriate for you to do that.
Hey, look, the reason I married a white woman is I fell in love with her, okay? So you don't know anything about me. Let me tell you this. It's precisely because I come from a different country with its own history of prejudice. It has its own caste system. Fortunately, my family has been outside the caste system since we were converts outside of Hinduism, and the caste system is within Hinduism, that I'm able to make these kinds of cross-cultural comparisons in my work. A few years ago, I had the privilege of debating the Reverend Jesse Jackson at Stanford University. We were debating racism. And is America a racist society? And he was giving examples of racism, and I said, look, Reverend Jackson, look, it's a big country. I can find examples of racism too. But show me a racism today that is strong enough that it's preventing you or me or your children or mine from achieving the American dream. Where is that kind of racism? Show it to me. And the Reverend Jackson, you know, he hems and haws and plays with his mustache and so on. And finally he says, I can't show it to you, but that's not because it doesn't exist. The racism has gone underground. It used to be overt. It is now covert. And so in a sense, I was very baffled here because I said to myself, why do he and I, here are two of us, intelligent people, we have the same skin color, but we see the world so differently. He sees racism everywhere, and I see it talked about a lot more than I actually see it in reality. And I think the reason for this is that the immigrant perspective, the non-white immigrant perspective on America is very different from that of the leaders of indigenous minority groups like Jackson. We come to America and we compare America to some other existing country. So we're using a comparative or historical standard of reference. Jesse Jackson isn't saying that America is terrible when you compare it to Ghana or Somalia or Ethiopia. He is comparing America to utopia. He is comparing America to the Garden of Eden, to perfection. He is holding America to its own high standard. So I think this is the reason why we see things differently. It's not because I'm evil and you're virtuous. It's because we're bringing different lenses into the camera and seeing the same set of facts through a different set of assumptions. So if you want diversity in American society, you're getting some of it with me.
Have you ever been discriminated against?
I certainly have, and I've certainly seen it. I also want to say that I think discrimination against blacks in America has a different thrust or a different complexion than that directed toward immigrants. Again, it comes back to that issue of inferiority. People may not like the Pakistani cab driver, or they're irritated by the foreigner, you know, go home and all that. What's interesting, by the way, is my book, The Enemy at Home, is producing an incredible outpouring of liberal racism. In other words, I'm getting all these emails that are of the tenor of go back to India and this sort of thing. And so, you know, liberalism, which you identify with open-mindedness and sort of tolerance for the outsider, you only have to scratch the surface, and I think a very vicious bigotry begins to push out. Anyway, the point I'm making here is I think I do a lot in the end of racism to distinguish between immigrants and African Americans, while also saying that there are things that, there are strategies of success that we have in common.
Have you seen a difference in this as Hispanics have become much more populated in the United States?
Well, Hispanics are a very interesting example of how the peculiar character of racism in America, because Hispanics are not a race. Hispanics are united really by speaking Spanish or the places they come from. But if you really look at it, the Cubans, the Mexicans, the Brazilians, very different history, different languages, sometimes different religion. We unite them in a simple category. Similarly with me, when I came to America, I suddenly found I was being called Asian American. I thought, wow, that's interesting. India and China, I never thought of us as having anything in common, very different histories and so on. But here, we all become Asian Americans. So our categories are very artificial. And now consider my daughter, who is in the middle. In fact, when she says when I was in the first grade, I was classified as African American. In my second grade, I was classified as Hispanic American. This year, I'm Asian American. She says, what am I? She reflects the difficulty in an increasingly multiracial society. And the Hispanics are a classic element of that, of not falling into this camp or that camp. The Hispanics are Western and they are non-Western. They straddle the divide, and even politically they have a choice. They can sort of adopt the strategy of agitate, 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 which has been the strategy of the civil rights leadership, or they can adopt the sort of immigrant strategy of navigate around the shoals of racism and claim your share of the American dream. Empirically, the second strategy works better.